Hemoglobin A1C. As you have seen, doctors diagnose diabetes based on your blood glucose level, and tracking your blood glucose is an important way to track the effects of diet and medication dosages. As helpful as glucose testing is, though, it really indicates only how you are doing at the time you take the test. The best way to tell how you are doing over the long run is with a test called hemoglobin A1C, or A1C for short. This is the main way you will track your progress in controlling diabetes. Hemoglobin is the pigment that gives color to your red blood cells and whose job it is to carry oxygen. What the A1C test actually measures is how much glucose has entered your red blood cells and become stuck to hemoglobin. If you have had a lot of glucose in your blood, a fair amount of it gets into your cells and sticks to your hemoglobin. If you have not had much glucose in your blood, your hemoglobin has much less stuck to it. Since red blood cells have a fairly short lifespan, about 4 months, the test indicates how well your blood sugar has been controlled over the preceding 3 months or so. The American Diabetes Association, ADA, recommends that people with diabetes get their A1C values below 7%. Research shows, however, that lower values cut the risk of complications, so many experts now call for targets of 6.5 or even 6%. Diabetes diets. If you have diabetes, chances are you were given printed guidelines on what to eat and what to avoid. Perhaps you have met with a dietitian and you may have been referred to a diabetes class. Unfortunately, most people do not get the ongoing support they need to make dietary changes, and as a result, this well-meaning effort may not have much effect. If you are like many people, you may have found your diet tough to sustain. For many years, the ADA has offered diet recommendations designed to provide basic nutrition while also keeping calorie intake and food choices reasonably stable over the course of the day and from one day to the next, as you learned just a moment ago. The idea was that if you had no carbohydrates for breakfast, but then had a big carb fest later in the day, your blood sugar would change erratically. Similarly, if you had lots of starchy foods on Monday, but went low-carb the rest of the week, your blood sugar would be all over the map and your medications could not keep up with you. Following the ADA guidelines, you would first meet with a registered dietitian, who would lay out an individualized plan describing specific numbers of servings of various foods for your meals and snacks, taking into account both your need to reduce your weight or cholesterol and your use of medications. Within your plan, you would be able to choose foods using exchange lists. That is, if the dietitian prescribed a certain number of starch servings at breakfast, for example, you could decide whether that starch is 1/4 of a bagel, 1 slice of raisin bread, half cup of cereal, or any other choice on the starch exchange list. Likewise, if your meal plan called for you to have a piece of fruit, you could pick from a range of choices with similar nutritional makeups. The guidelines do improve most people's eating habits. If you would like to go this route, you can find a registered dietitian by contacting the American Dietetic Association at 800-366-1655 or the American Diabetes Association at 800-342-2383. The results of this approach vary dramatically from one person to the next, however. Some lose weight and see their glucose numbers fall. Others don't get too far. In research studies, the typical drop in hemoglobin A1C, the indicator of blood sugar control discussed earlier, is roughly 0.5 of a percentage point, example from 8.0 to 7.5%, with some studies showing slightly better results and others worse. You will learn more about A1C and other tests in Chapter 7. Researchers and clinicians have long lamented these lackluster results. In 1993, an article in the Journal of the American Dietetic Association summed up the findings of research studies up to that point and concluded that diabetes diets are challenging and most people do not follow them. Our own experience with the most recent ADA diet guidelines is similar. The guidelines are understandable and, to an extent, logical, but even with a fair amount of support, many people find it hard to make the diet work in their day-to-day lives. The diet you will hear about in this book is completely different. For many people, it is much easier as well as much more effective and up-to-date. Now, consulting a registered dietitian is still a good idea because he or she can guide you in the approach described in the following chapters. Take this book with you. Your dietitian can help you get started. Drugs and money. The diet you will hear about in this book is powerful. Unfortunately, the power of nutrition is neglected in many medical practices, and in the process, diabetes treatment is reduced to a series of prescriptions. Don't misunderstand me. Diabetes medications can be life-saving. They can reduce your blood sugar and, over the long run, cut your risk of complications. And if diet and lifestyle changes do not do the job, it is a serious mistake to forego medications. You can find a detailed description of them in Appendix 1. But some doctors and patients view medications as the only tools at their disposal. The marketing of pharmaceuticals has so dominated medical practice that many doctors give little more than lip service to diet and exercise, which can often be dramatically effective. Open any diabetes journal, and you will see expensive advertisements for this drug and that drug. The manufacturers even advertise in popular magazines, encouraging readers to ask their doctors for prescriptions. If you were to leaf through the mail that floods doctors' offices, you would see information about medical courses, symposia, and online educational programs, all paid for by drug companies trumpeting their products. These companies cater full dinners to lure doctors to presentations about one or another application of their drugs. While many doctors find such events distasteful, they are required to attend medical courses to maintain their hospital or university affiliations, and drug companies have cornered the medical education market. At the ADA annual meeting, drug company representatives arrive at the loading dock looking as if they were preparing to put on an enormous political convention. They erect huge display booths costing hundreds of thousands of dollars and staff them with armies of sales personnel ready to provide gifts, food, musical entertainment, and trinkets of all kinds, all designed to woo the clinicians in attendance. You, the drug consumer, are stuck with the bill for all this. A typical diabetes pill contains a few cents worth of active medication, but the retail cost is heavily inflated by its manufacturer's promotional expenses and its continued efforts to find yet another pill that can carve out more of the market share. The diabetes business is not limited to drugs. Patients need to buy glucose testing equipment too. While glucose meters are not terribly expensive, manufacturers charge a small fortune for the supplies that go with them, much like the shaving product companies that give away free razors to sell expensive blades. The test strips that fit into a typical glucose meter cost about $1 each, and a person might use anywhere from 1 to 8 strips per day. Add up the costs of doctor visits, laboratory tests, medication, and glucose monitoring equipment, and diabetes becomes a phenomenally expensive disease. It is my hope that as the power of nutritional changes is more fully appreciated, the commercial aspects of diabetes will take a back seat. The U.S. government has already invested in research on diet and diabetes, and that investment will continue to pay important dividends. We must also turn our attention to putting what we have learned about nutrition to work. That means encouraging doctors to focus on diet first, pushing insurers to cover dietetic counseling for patients and their families, educating parents about nutritional approaches to help prevent type 1 diabetes in their children, and working with schools to serve healthful meals so children are not sent down the road to overweight and diabetes, as a great many currently are. These measures could control the so-called diseases of affluence far more effectively than doctors are able to at present, dramatically reducing the need for medications in the first place. Each person with diabetes has a unique ability to heal and return to health. This ability differs from one person to the next, But in our studies, we have not seen age, weight, or any other factor to be a barrier to improvement. The remainder of this book will show you what I believe to be the most powerful dietary approach to diabetes that is currently known.